speakers, Frederike Otto, Adela Sotelo, and Luca Zardo. We will also be recording this webinar, so not the people who are in the audience, your names won't be recorded, anything, it's not shown that you're here, but so that we can then put this on our YouTube page for Fridays for Future, and so that people who weren't here will be able to access this. Exactly, but then let's get started. So I think the situation across Europe is quite clear for everyone who has been either reading the news or has been living in regions affected by the heat waves and the bushfires and also flash flooding that's been happening across the continent. And it's clear, as we've been saying for many years, that the climate crisis is not just a far-off problem or a distant reality, that the climate crisis has arrived in all corners of the globe, and that it's affecting the lives of people today. And so we might expect that in the face of these incredibly harsh conditions, that it's obvious to everyone that we must concretely address the climate crisis. This seems like the logical solution and a logical step. And that this means not just empty words and empty promises, but that we need concrete policies and measures that rapidly reduce fossil fuels, enable a socially just transition, and also introduce adaptation measures that make living in a 1.2 or 1.5 degree world possible. But apparently that's not the situation that we're facing. Instead, we're seeing how the far right and conservative parties are instrumentalizing the situation by spreading climate denialism and turning climate policies into something that people are afraid of, and trying to play social justice and climate justice against each other, even though that we know these two things come in hand. So concretely, why it's so important today that we have Adela from Fridays for Future Spain is because we are experiencing this incredible heat wave and flash flooding across Spain, and that's something that's affecting the reality of everybody in Spain right now. And on Sunday, there is going to be the election, which is, of course, a big moment. It's a very scary moment, but also an incredible opportunity to address the situation that we're currently facing. So this vote was called very, very quickly by the current Prime Minister, Pedro Sanchez, in response to his very poor performance at the May local elections, in which his party did not win. And this means that we have a very open situation, and the polls have shown that the situation is on a knife edge, that the situation is very scary, and that currently neither of the two major parties are going to have enough win, or that at least they're projected not to have enough win to win enough votes to govern on their own. But instead that either the Conservatives will need support of the far right party, Vox, or that Sanchez would need to look towards the left, and for example, to the left group of Zuma, to be able to form a government. And so this is a very nervous and tense situation that we're experiencing right now. And I think this is not just a situation for Spain on its own. This is something that we're seeing across all of Europe. Recently, there have been a lot of polls across Germany showing the rise of popular support for the AfD, the far right party in Germany. And we're seeing that in the most recent study that the AfD has about 20% support, which is second across all parties, and is more than the SPD, the party of the current Chancellor, Olaf Scholz. This is a very scary situation that we're seeing that's paralleling across all of Europe. And we've got here today Luca Zardo from Fridays for Future Italy, who's going to talk about the situation in Italy, because last year there was also Italian elections, and we saw that Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, who's a far-right politician in Italy, has become Prime Minister. And she's a great example of the tactics and the goals of the conservative and far-right campaigns right now. And her populist party has jumped from just 32 seats to 119 seats in the parliament in the 2022 election. And of course, there's many different factors that lead to such a situation, but I think we can all agree that this shows a very scary development of politics in Italy right now. She has been attacking immigration, saying very problematic things about migration from outside of Europe into Italy, and of course also to the topic of climate. And she recently, in an online public event in Valencia, also showed her support for Vox, the far-right party in Spain, and has shown that she would like to see this wave of far-right politicians gaining more power in Europe spread across the EU. And I think this is a very tense situation ahead of the EU elections in 2024. So now I would like to introduce our guests. First, we have Frederike Otto. She is a German climatologist working at the Grantham Institute for Climate Change and the Environment at Imperial College London. And her research focuses on analysing to which degree extreme weather conditions and events are influenced by or result of the climate crisis or other external climatic factors, which is known as climate change attribution. And she's also an IPCC author, having contributed to the IPCC Sixth Assessment Report, The Scientific Basis in 2021, and more recently, the Synthesis Report of the Sixth Assessment Cycle in 2023. And so I would like to now introduce her, give you the floor, Fredi.
Thank you very much. I think Germany deserves no credit for my career. So everything I've ever managed to do was in Britain. So I think I'm very much a British climate scientist. And I will give a very brief overview of sort of what we can say from a scientific point of view about these extreme heat events and how we know. So I think I would like to start with really saying that climate change, when we talk about climate change, a lot of the discussions is about reaching 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees, or it is about the future. And it's often talked about as if, there's a big asteroid falling on our head when we reach 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees or whatever, or if there's this cliff we fall over. But we are long in the era of loss and damage from climate change. And today we have a global temperature increase of about 1.2 degrees. And that translates into an increase in the intensity and likelihood of extreme weather events, sea level rise, glacier melt, and all of these events have meant that people have lost their lives, their livelihoods, and as well, people, not only people, but also ecosystems. And so climate change is really not something that is happening in the future, but it's here and now, and it's particularly impacting those most vulnerable in our society. And that's not just globally, people in the global south, but also in every country. The people who die from heat are those who live in poor housing, poorly insulated housing, houses next to big roads where air pollution is also high. And yeah, sadly, it's often the same people who vote for the far right. So clearly there is a message that we do not get across. And so at the moment we are experiencing, so this is just 3 of the heat waves or of the extreme weather events that are experienced across the world right now. And one of them is, of course, in Spain and Italy and the Balkans and Greece. Another big heat wave is in the southwest of the US and the north of Mexico, having led to at least 200 deaths on the Mexican in Mexico already. Some of them migrants on the border to the US, and one occurring right now in China, with temperatures above 50 degrees having been measured in China. And all of these events have in common that they would not have been as intense and and we wouldn't see so many of them if it wasn't for human-induced climate change. So how do we know this? The idea, and that's exactly what I do in my research, to find out how much weather and to what extent, and for heat waves, it's really just the question of how much more likely has an event been made because of climate change. And the idea behind this science is quite straightforward. So what we do when we do an attribution study is say we're interested in the heat wave currently hitting Spain and Italy. What's the role of climate change in this event? So first of all, we need to define the event. So say, okay, it's been happening since the 14th. So it's a seven-day event. And so we look at maximum temperatures over the affected areas for 7 days and say, and then we might find that in the world we live in today, this is a 1 in 10 year event. And we can find that out, of course, not just by looking at the event itself, but because we have observational data and weather forecasts and models that allow us to not only look at what's possible weather, what's the actual weather, but also what's possible weather in the world we live in today. And in this schematic that you can see, you can look at what are possible July temperatures in Italy and Spain in the world we live in today. And in this schematic, you might end up with something like this red curve. And then you can say the event that we have observed just now is what is indicated here as P1, has a likelihood of occurrence as 1 in 10-year event. And that doesn't, of course, mean that it happens every 10 years, but it means that in any given year, there's a 10% chance of such an event to occur. And then, because we know very well how many greenhouse gases have been put into the atmosphere since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, we can use climate models, and that's exactly the same models that are used for weather forecast, and remove the greenhouse gases from the atmosphere of these weather models, and then simulate possible weather in a world that might have been without climate change. And then, as in this schematic, we might find a very different distribution of possible weather. And we might find that without climate change, this event would have only been a 1 in 100-year event. So it would only have had a 1% chance of occurring in any given year. And because the difference between these two worlds is the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, we can attribute this change to climate change. So that's what we do, and that's the idea behind that. And the numbers we get from the models, but of course we don't just have climate models as lines of evidence, but we also, these climate models are built on basic physics. So they follow Newton's second law and the conservation of energy, the conservation of momentum, and the conservation of mass. And we also have actually observations from a much cooler climate, especially in Europe from the beginning of the 20th century and also from the end of the 18th century, so we can test that these theories actually work. So this is a schematic for just explaining the theory. In reality, and this is just some numbers I have run right now, so don't quote these numbers, but what we will find when we run the study for Spain and Italy, it will look something pretty much like this, because for heat waves in Europe, we now see that these two distributions of what's possible weather, or what's possible weather, have actually, when it comes to temperature, moved very far apart from each other. And you can see what is an extreme event, or what's the event we observe now, is in today's climate is a totally possible event, but in a world that was 1.2 degrees cooler, so without climate change, this event would never have happened. So temperatures of such intensity would not have occurred. And as I said, this is just some numbers I just played with to illustrate this talk for Spain and Italy. But we have done many studies on extreme heat events. So one is from last year, where we had 40 degrees in London, where we found exactly the same situation, that without climate change, this event would not have been possible to occur. And similarly, a study that we did earlier this year is about the extreme heat in South Asia in April, where we looked at two different regions. So one is India and Bangladesh. And if you wonder what this purple thing in India is, that's the dry area of the country, which we excluded from the analysis, because in this case, it was a very humid heat wave. And so we looked only at the humid parts of India and Bangladesh, and also Laos and Thailand. And in this case, for Laos and Thailand, we also found this is an event that would not have happened without climate change. And for India and Bangladesh, we found that climate change made the event at least 30 times more likely. But I would really like to highlight two other findings from this study that we did on India and Bangladesh. So first of all, heat waves are among the deadliest natural hazards, with thousands of people dying from heat every year, not just in India and Bangladesh, also in Europe. So last year in Germany alone, 4,500 people died during the heat wave in London. That was 2 days, 2,000 people died. So it's not something that is limited to the global south. But the next point is really important, where heat action plans exist. So where there's early warning and then people also knowing what to do with this warning and take an action, death rates go down. But in the countries we studied in this case, only in India, some of the cities had action plans, heat action plans. The other parts of the world did not. And when you look across Europe, you also find that there are some parts where heat action plans exist, but others are not. So that's really important urgent action that also needs to be taken. And then one last point, of course, extreme heat does not only affect human lives, but it also has many other impacts. And these were two heat waves, so one in India and Pakistan happening last April, and then one in Argentina and Uruguay that happened at the end of 2022. And both of these events had huge impacts. So the one in Argentina basically halved the wheat harvest, and the one in India led to the Indian government putting out a wheat export stop. And that had huge impact on global food prices and global wheat prices. And we are all paying for these impacts still with the ongoing inflation in food particularly. And so I don't expect anyone to be able to understand this figure or look at it, but really just to illustrate that heat is not something that is inconvenient for the elderly and nice to have for everyone else, but it has a huge impact on all aspects of the economy. And of course, it's particularly those suffering who have least economic means. And I'll leave it here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Liddy. That was wonderful and gives us a really good scientific basis for the rest of our discussion. I think, it's very clear that we are speaking from the perspective of scientists, and that the far right or conservative climate deniers don't have the facts on their side and don't have the science behind them. So thank you very much. I think if anyone has questions, there's a question or Q&A function in the webinar. So feel free to write your questions in there. And then at the end, once all our speakers have spoken, I'll ask some questions for all of our guests. So feel free to ask the questions there. And now we will give over to Adela. Adela is an activist from Fridays for Future Spain. She lives in Santiago de Compostela and is 16 and still in school and is active with Fridays for Future. And she's going to introduce us to the current situation in Spain, looking ahead of the elections, and also what it's like to be experiencing the heat wave conditions across the country. So welcome, Adela, and go right ahead.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Adela, and today I represent Fridays for Future Spain. You listen me. First of all, thank all of you who are here today to vote potential Spanish respecters or other national spectators. Thank also to Frederike Otto for encouraging her to hold this meeting with us and the college from Fridays for Future Germany to meet us. Next Sunday is a key day for us in the Spanish people, because we will decide the next democratic government for the next 4 years, which are a key moment in the fight against the climate crisis. Unfortunately, these weeks we have back to see how certain political parties openly declare themselves climate change deniers. These elections are a warning that a strong civil society is needed to prevent climate denialism from reaching these situations. A new president is the government of Giorgia Meloni in Italy. In Spain, people who do not believe in the human origin of the climate crisis do not stand 5%, but their voice is being amplified by parties such as both. The establishing of the far-right governments can be fought with greater citizen participation. The Spanish elections are the last ones before the European elections in January 2024. We must learn from this experience to prevent the far-right from increasing their presence in the European Parliament as well. These elections are also decided as they will determine which government will lead
Adela, is everything okay?
Spanish elections are the squad for the European elections in January 2024. We must learn from this experience to prevent the far right from increasing their presence in the European Parliament as well. These elections are also decided as they will determine which government will lead the European Union Council presidents, determining the ambitions of various legislation that will affect the entire European Union on climatic and energy issues. This year in 23 is more important than ever go to both thinking about science, people, and the climate. Because although money moves the world, more money is not eaten, and not eat, and above all, to life we need is a healthy planet.
Thank you so much, Adela. And now we will have Luca Zardo from Fridays for Future Italy. He is currently studying a master's degree in environmental economics at the University of Turin, and is involved in Fridays for Future on a local level in Turin, on a national level, and also European and international level. And he was highly involved in organizing our most recent Fridays for Future European Congress in Turin last year. And he's going to be talking about the similarities and parallels between the current political situation in Italy, Spain, and this overall trend that we're seeing across Europe, including countries such as Austria, Finland, and Sweden, where conservative and far-right parties are gaining support and increasing the spread of climate change denialism. So yeah, here you go, Luca, take it right ahead.
Thank you very much. And I also want to thank you, Adela, for the very interesting intervention that she did before. And yes, I'm happy to be here because I think there are so many similarities between what can happen in Spain in the next weeks and what unfortunately already happened in Italy last year. First similarity that we see these days is the impact of this very dangerous heat wave that is impacting all around Europe. In Italy last week and in the beginning of this week, we saw an increase of 20 to 25% of people entering into emergency and hospitals because of the heat wave, because of the dehydration, and because of illnesses related to the overexposure to the heat. And so, like, as Freddie was explaining before, this is an event that maybe in the past would have happened with a 0.001% of probability, and now it's something that we keep seeing because in 2003 we saw an incredibly dangerous heat wave in Europe, last year as well, and this year again. So it's something that we will have probably to live with, even if we keep global warming below 1.5 degrees. And so it's very important that cities and local councils around Italy and Europe give information and help people to sustain this kind of heat wave. Otherwise, we will see an ever increasing number of people dying because of the overexposure to heat. And another similarity that we can see between Italy and Spain is the danger of a far-right government taking power in the next weeks, and also sending huge numbers of European Parliament members next year during the European election. In Italy last year, as Patsy was explaining before, we had the general elections, and two of the three parties that are running the government coalition are not even part of the European Popular Party, but they are even part of the European Conservatives, which is even like more right than the center-right party. And those two parties are the biggest party in Italy now. The first one has around 30% of the consensus among the people, even 1 year after the beginning of the government. And that's why we need to keep fighting and increase our pressure against this party, not just because of an ideological divide, but also because we see that what the Giorgia Meloni government has been doing this year has been extremely dangerous for the people, for the climate, and even for the environmental movement. Just to mention a few facts, we could talk about that for hours, but just like some things that maybe are not clear around Europe. But the Senate Speaker of the Fratelli d'Italia party, which is Giorgia Meloni's party, 30% of the votes last year. The Senate Speaker is a climate denialist, openly denialist, who keeps tweeting and posting and speaking about the fact that there's no climate change happening now, nothing is changing. Even in these days, he and other party members keep saying that it's normal, that we don't have to worry, even when we see people dying at work because of the heat and people having to rush to the hospital because of the weather. And as I was saying, their policies are dangerous for the people, are dangerous for the climate, of course, because we see that Italy is relying even more on fossil fuel for electricity production. We keep installing new power plants based on gas or fossil fuel infrastructures, mainly natural gas, fossil gas. And it's dangerous even for the environmental movement, which is something that maybe is not so common, so known around Europe, but we have seen so many new laws reducing the space for environmental movement to demonstrate, reducing the freedom of expression. And we see many environmental activists being jailed these weeks also because of their activism and because of their will to defend the planet and the conditions to live on it that we see today. So and next year we will have another European election where probably the climate change topic and the climate emergency will be at the very center of the right-wing agenda. They will try to go even backwards, even if the European policies are still quite mild, we have to say, in comparison with what we should do. They will try to go backwards. And Italy, probably what we have to fight against in Italy is to avoid sending another huge number of MPs which will support this right-wing agenda, which is very dangerous for the climate. So that's why in Spain, I really support people to try to avoid this kind of destiny, because we've seen what happened in Italy, and I really hope that the environmental movement, the social movement in Spain can prevent a similar outcome to happen also there. So that's why we wanted to share this message here, and we keep fighting. We will be demonstrating on the 15th of September. We will have a national demonstration on the 6th of October. So we keep the pressure, and I hope in Spain, the outcome will be better than the actual one in Italy at the moment.
Yes, thank you so much, Luca. I think that is absolutely true, that it's essential that we show on the streets what the people want, and that not just because the polls go in one way, that there's also a lot of support for climate policies and climate action. I would then start a round of questions. So if there are any more questions, feel free to write them into the chat, into the question and answer function. Firstly, there's a logistical question for you, Fredi. If the slides that you showed will be available somewhere, or if you have maybe somewhere else, like a brief introduction to attribution science and how that works, for people maybe wanting to use some of these informations later.
So all the figures are actually from our website, World Weather Attribution. So yeah, you can just pick and choose.
Okay, perfect. So the person who asked that, and maybe then more content-based question for you. How do you see the challenge for communicating climate attribution science to a broader audience that doesn't have a scientific background? I think we saw quite a lot of headlines there, but in times where climate denialism seems to be on the rise, is this a challenge that you face, or how do you deal with the question or the denialism of climate scientists?
So I think, of course, the people who ask me are not the climate deniers, but it's people who journalists, people in the media, who want to actually write about these extreme heat events. So I think I always think it's, yeah, if you have a really climate denier who says climate change is not happening, that is really hard to argue with, because they are basically denying that physics work. If someone tells you that basic physics don't apply, then there isn't that very much you can do. But I think the really important part of the population that we need to reach and that we need to talk to is these climate deniers are a small minority who have a very clear goal that is driven by money and a political agenda, but they are not interested in understanding anything about the weather. They're not interested about the people. They're not interested about the population. But I think there is a huge amount of people out there who are confused by these messages, and who and I think that's the really important part of the population to talk to. And I think so one of the reasons why I do this work on attribution individual weather events is because you can link what we experience with the signs of climate change by showing that, well, of course there have been extreme events without climate change, but this heat wave would never have been as hot as it is if it wasn't for climate change. And also we would not have seen so many of these heat waves. And I think that's I think that's sort of what I try. And also, of course, then we also always link that with, it's not just a number. It's not just, oh, we reached 40 degrees, but it actually means that mortality goes up dramatically, and that some houses you can actually not live in anymore, and that's and also it's and also who are the people who are affected by this? And it's those who are already struggling, those who have little money, those who have who have less access to education and so on. And I think that's that's what we try to communicate. And but that also means, of course, you have some agency to change that. You can on one hand just talk to your MPs, vote and so on, but you also can we all have spheres of influence. So if you are if you are in a school, you can engage with the school committee to change how the school is run, to change what people are taught. So there are lots of things that we can do locally, just raising awareness about heat waves, looking after elderly, and so on. And I think that is also important, that it's not something that is out of our hands, but that we have agency to change things. I'm not sure that answered the question, but if I had a wonder argument against deniers, we wouldn't be in this situation, I think.
No worries. I think that answered the question perfectly. And I guess I would summarize that as that it's important to speak to the experiences of people. And when we're in a heat wave situation, that those are exactly the experiences that we need to acknowledge from the population, and then explain the science behind that. And I think you also very well answered the question that was then put in the chat of describing exactly what the differences between the current heat waves that we're seeing right now are and those in the past. So would you summarize that as they're getting warmer and also longer, or are there other factors that are also different now to previous heat waves?
Yeah, so I think one thing is that the heat waves we have today are hotter than they would have been without climate change, and we see many more heat waves. That, yeah, of course, it doesn't mean that weather hasn't existed before climate change, but we see many, many more heat waves. They are longer and they are hotter than they would, and in some cases, as I've shown some examples, reach temperatures that would have been basically impossible without climate change.
That is a very strong quote from you there. Okay, now I have a question for Luca. So I think we would all agree from your contribution that the situation in Italy is very tense and also very difficult for climate activism. And I think we also saw Meloni in May, when she visited the North Italian region after the floods, that she didn't blame the climate crisis, but rather blamed climate policy, which is a very problematic way of describing the situation. Maybe you could say something a little bit about what you have learned from the Italian elections last year, and what your feelings are towards the EU elections in 2024, because they are coming up in the coming. And I think there's a lot of work to do until then.
Yeah, exactly. So as I was saying before, I think that one of the topics where we can better fight the far right wing agenda is exactly on climate crisis, because on it's one of the topics that they cannot cover. Like the only strategy that they have is to deny the whole crisis, the whole emergency, and it's something that can maybe like be sustainable for them for a short period. But these days we are seeing that people realize that it's fake, that they realize that the climate crisis exists and it's true. And even when you look at polls around, for example, Italian population about the climate emergency, as Freddy was saying at the beginning, the denialism is a very low percentage, like around 5 to 10% of the people are still questioning the idea of climate change. The huge majority of people understands that the climate is changing, and that's where we have to act. I think we have to spread the message, to speak to the people and explain to them that climate change is happening, that there's a way to fight against it. We cannot, of course, block it completely, but we can still save many important living conditions we have. So it's very important to fight for 1.5 degrees, and that's where we have to act, because people realize that the climate emergency is real, and that's also thanks to the work we've been doing in the past 4 years, I think. And now what the far right is like leveraging on is the fear that change will worsen people's lives. Instead, what we have to explain is that change will not worsen people's lives, will keep the living condition of the planet, and will even improve the life of the people, which will not have to suffer from heat waves. Just a few months later, a huge drought that in Italy happened between January and March. So people's lives, working conditions can improve if we really want to address the climate emergency. And that's, I think, the message we have to get across, and I think that's what we are working on. And I think it can be really powerful to reduce the consensus of the far right parties and increase the consensus of parties and in general people who really care about the climate emergency.
Yes, absolutely. You're very right. And I think it's also essential that we come together across Europe as climate activists and as the general public ahead of the EU elections to share our perspectives and create a European-wide narrative that really shows that the climate policies that we need are for the people and are going to improve the living conditions of everybody across Europe and globally, and aren't taking away anything from us, but rather making the future of our generations possible. And now maybe a question for you, Adela. How would you assess the situation for young people in their lead up to the elections, especially for people who cannot vote? I would assume that you cannot vote, and do you speak with your grandparents or older generations or people in your communities about the opportunity and privilege that they have to vote in the coming election on Sunday?
Okay, that election is very controversial because they have got other elections 3 months ago, and the people is very tired for that. In this moment, we have got a very big problem. The inquisitors said that maybe the parties in the right parties can govern in coalition, but our problem is that the governments like Vox is a problem because they said no for the climate change, and they are having a problem. The people in my community the people is tired for that, but the people is too scary because we are looking the countries like Polonia, Hungary, Italy that have got a government of radicalist government, and that's a problem. We are expecting the results. I think the young people who can vote is going to vote, a lot of these people, but maybe a lot of people don't go to vote, and that's a problem because the people who vote to the radical radical parties are going to vote. Yes, they are going to vote, but the people don't vote. To vote, if the people maybe vote to the good parties with the climate crisis. That's a problem. The other people, some people is going to vote to the radical aims. They are, and other people is going to vote to the parties who defend the climate crisis, defend the people, defend the good work, defend that. We have to wait for the results of Sunday, but we are expected and we are very, very worried about it.
Yes, absolutely. I think that shows that it's very essential that we call out for everybody to go and vote on Sunday, and that political engagement takes many forms, and that means sometimes going onto the streets, as we will on the 15th of September, and that also means going out to vote and voting for current and future generations and for young people that aren't able to vote. And now I'd have a final question for you, Fredi, about the role of not only mitigation at this point, but also adaptation, and how important that is for regions that are currently already being affected by the climate crisis. Is that a focus also of the communication around attributing the causes of climate events and heat waves and floods, that we also need adaptation measures, not only mitigation measures?
Yes, I think it's very important to highlight that we need to adapt, because even if we stop burning fossil fuels today, which of course we should ideally do, but we still have a climate that has changed, and we are seeing these heat extremes right now, and they will not go away. So these events are not rare anymore. They are events we have to live with, and people don't have to die from heat waves. But we can adapt to them, and I think it's really important. So there are very important short-term measures to take. On the one hand, especially in countries that are not used to extreme heat, to really educate people how to not to go out in the hottest hours of the day, to shut the windows during the day and open them at night, and really simple things. But these can save your lives. And I think, but of course, there's also in the medium term really important adaptation measures that need to be taken. And that is redesigning our cities, insulating homes, having more green spaces. And that is not just increasing the quality of life in the cities, but it means that houses don't get so hot. Also, energy demand goes down, so it helps mitigation as well. Having green spaces means that temperatures are lower it's quite impressive to see how much lower the temperature is in a road that has trees compared to a road without trees. And of course, if you have non-asphalt and non-concreted surfaces, then in flash floods, the water has somewhere to go. So it doesn't go into the houses of people, but it goes into the ground. So it also helps with flooding. So that is something we have to do, because we have already changed the climate a lot. And so adaptation is not something that's optional or nice to have, but we have to do both. But I think what's really important, and Luca, you said that, it will actually make the life of the quality of life better for people, not worse. And that's something that, that I think is really important to get across.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And it shows how crucial it is that we don't let the debate be distracted by climate deniers, that we don't let the debate go to the direction of only speaking about is the science real or is it not? We know that the science is real, and that we focus the debate on crucial and concrete policies, and those for mitigation, but also adaptation to make the lives for people in Europe and across the world more livable. So if there are any more questions, feel free to add them now into the chat. I will give one more minute for those. This is the last moment. Okay, it doesn't seem like there are any more questions. So I would then thank all of the speakers today. It was really wonderful to hear from your different perspectives ahead of the very nervous Spanish elections on Sunday, and then also the EU elections on in June next year. And also a reminder not to forget that on the 15th of September, Fridays for Future is going globally onto the streets for our next global climate strike. And we are looking forward to seeing everybody, all of you there. So make sure to tell all your friends and family that it's essential that they come onto the streets with us. And thank you so much.
Bye-bye. Thank you for organizing the webinar. Bye.